about it as the left hand and right hand of the establishment, you'll have one of those hands create a problem intentionally. And then the opposing hand comes in and offers the solution. But the solution was always what the establishment wanted, but it's sold as a solution to a problem created by the other side. So it creates the illusion that the opposing force solved a problem, but in reality, the problem was manufactured by one hand of the system, and then the solution was offered by the other hand. The man that claims to have created CBDCs is a man from Barbados named Oliver Gale. He created one of the first, well, arguably the first CBDC project in the Caribbean, and then went on to have a key role in creating the Nigerian CBDC, the e-Naira. So the way the CBDC in Nigeria was set up is that in order to access the CBDC, you have to have a national identification number, which is the Nigerian digital ID project. So you have to have a digital ID in order to be able to access the Nigerian CBDC. And the way they tried to get people to onboard to the CBD system was by essentially cutting off the vast majority of the cash in circulation in Nigeria. And so despite the fact that they created these conditions to coerce people into using the CBDC, the populace resists. And that suggests that the idea of CBDCs being a tool for financial inclusion, called it the driver's license for the internet. The idea is to have a government-issued ID be necessary for you to access the internet. And in doing so, they know not just what you're posting and saying online, they know what information you're reading online as well. But the difference is, once it's directly connected to a government-issued ID, they could prosecute you for things like publishing misinformation and all of that. And there's actually been pushes from people like former Google CEO Eric Schmidt to punish people who publish alleged disinformation, and that the need, that it's necessary to have IDs connected to social media accounts and to people's internet access as a means of facilitating those kinds of arrests or, law enforcement activity. Well, there's a couple of reasons why I think they'd want to have private banks have like a major role in this digital currency system to come. If there's a private sector entity banking you and managing your money, it's much easier for them to bank you than the federal government. So for example, if the Federal Reserve were to do a direct issue CBDC, it would be harder for them to freeze someone's bank account or debank them in any sort of significant way, as opposed to a private company where you have, for example, precedents where JP Morgan Chase, for example, debanked Dr. Mercola and some of his executives and didn't give any reason as to why. They just said, we can no longer provide you with financial services, no questions asked. That can just, she essentially decides who's a bank worth saving and who's not. And this is sort of the perpetuation of the too big to fail model that we heard about in 2008. So one indication the system is being rolled out in this way is looking at the people developing the infrastructure and what type of digital currencies they're supporting. So one of the biggest developers right now of CBDCs is this company called R3 that's backed by some of the biggest Wall Street banks in the world. And they were named by Central Banking Magazine as the CBDC Partner of the Year last year. And then they're developing a litany of CBDCs for countries all around the world. But that's just one part of what they do. They have this thing they call a digital currency accelerator. And the three types of digital currencies R3 develops are CBDCs, stable coins, and tokenized deposits or deposit tokens. And some banks in the US have already rolled out deposit tokens. Citigroup, JP Morgan. JP Morgan actually had a research paper out last year about how CBDCs are inferior to deposit tokens and how deposit tokens are better. So Oliver Gale, who defines himself as the founder of CBDCs, has more recently co-founded a company called Fluent Finance. What Fluent Finance is they attempt to create a trustworthy dollar-pegged stablecoin that they call US Plus. And it's sort of framed as an answer to dollar-pegged stablecoins like Tether that have been controversial for having opaque reserves. So the whole thing about US Plus is having trackable reserves in real time and all of this. And so it's an attempt to create a very extremely trustworthy and participating in Cyber Polygon, and no criticism of the WEF for co-hosting their cyber simulation, cyber attack simulation with the supposed hackers at large that supposedly interfered in the U.S. elections.
They said that they did that?
Well, okay, so in 2016 and 2020, there were a lot of, narratives propagated by U.S. mainstream media about Russian hackers, and none of those mainstream media outlets criticized the WEF for doing their big cyber attack simulation in partnership with the Russian government.
Oh, they did it with the Russian government?
Yeah, Cyber Polygon was the WEF and a subsidiary of Sberbank, Russia's largest privately owned bank, and also the Russian prime minister gave like the opening remarks, and it was affiliated to some degree with the Russian government. Yeah. So there's been a few entities besides the WEF that have sort of gamed out these cyber attack simulations in a very significant way. One of them is the Financial Services ISAC, or Information Sharing and Analysis Center, which is essentially the biggest private banks in the United States coming together to share information and plan shared responses to potential crises, including a cyber attack on the financial system. And FS-ISAC is affiliated to an extent with the WEF and also with the Carnegie Endowment. And the Carnegie Endowment has similarly charted out potential solutions if and when there is a major cyber attack on the financial system. And they did so in partnership with the Federal Reserve, the European Central Bank, and some of the biggest private banks in the world like JP Morgan Chase. Their proposed solution is to merge banks, banking regulators, and intelligence a role in a financial crisis. It's an easy way to consolidate banks so that only systemically important ones survive the hack. And it could also potentially be a very effective means of onboarding people onto this new digital currency paradigm. So, for example, let's say this cyber attack on the banks takes place, and they say, well, the existing money in your account has disappeared. The hackers took it, but we can return to you the exact same amount of money you had, but it won't be in the dollars you had before. It will be in USDC or this dollar-backed stablecoin, or it will be this token. So you can get an equivalent amount of money back, right, from the money that was stolen from you, but it has to be this new money. It has to be part of this new system. There's the potential here for people to steal money from you and then essentially give it back to you, but with new conditions and with a new social contract.
Yeah. You
voluntarily accepted this new system and voluntarily onboarded to this new paradigm, but it's a coercion to an extreme degree. All of your money was stolen, right? And now you can only get it back if you take it in the form of the digital dollars that vehicles via policies linked to the Sustainable Development Goals to phase out fossil fuel vehicles, or they are contractors for the Pentagon and intelligence, like SpaceX.
So you're saying the guy looks like a front, or?
Well, I think there's a conflict of interest with Elon Musk. So, for example, take his recent ownership of Twitter, now called X. The Pentagon has spent the better part of the last decade developing very sophisticated tools to manipulate social media, including bots and other techniques that, per the Air Force in one of their contracts, said was aimed at controlling people with social media like we control drones. Do you think that Elon Musk, as a Pentagon and intelligence contractor, would restrict the Pentagon's use of those tools they spent millions of dollars in over a decade developing? I don't think so. I think we're being pushed towards essentially the same policies, but by a different group of quote unquote leaders who are trying to frame themselves as the opposite side of the political divide, because the existing side that was pushing those was, they were using sort of more like left-leaning political rhetoric. And so because they got pushback, they're trying to sell those same policies in a different wrapper that's sort of cloaked in this rhetoric of populism and right-leaning politics. I think there's essentially a consensus that some other very significant financial crisis is in the cards for the next several years. And if you are the big banks and you know that's going to happen, you probably want to avoid a scenario like what happened in 2008, where the public knew